Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Champions of Self podcast. Thanks again for joining today. My name is Ben Eden, your host, and today I'm excited to welcome our guest. She is a dog trainer from California. Now, if you're asking, what in the world does a dog trainer know about emotions? I'm glad you asked. That means I've piqued your interest. but today I'm happy to welcome Grace Henke from California. Grace, how are you?
Pretty good. I'm glad to be here.
Good. Glad to have you. Grace, tell us a bit more about who you are and what you do.
Well, so I was born and raised in Beijing, China, and I came to the States to pursue a master's degree in statistics. That's almost like a little over a decade ago. And now I run a dog training business specializing in shy, fearful, and reactive dogs.
And specializing in what dogs?
Shy, fearful, and reactive.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So you and I were talking the other day about emotions, of course, and how it related to dog training. So for the benefit of the listeners, why don't you tell us, what do you learn about emotions when you're helping the dogs and their trainers?
Well, I actually think that would be a reversed question. It's really how I learn about myself and then how I can apply that to the dog, right? And
Okay.
And also when I work with, people always tend to think I'm a dog trainer, I work with dogs. But the reality of it, I actually work with the dog owners. And how I help dog owners overcome their emotional baggages in order to help their dogs. So yeah, and so myself, well, I've always battled self-confidence since I grew up. I definitely blame, I don't know if this is video, but quote, blame how I grew up, right? How I grew up in this culture that humble is what you're supposed to do. Being, you can't brag about your accomplishments. You can't say you're so proud, right? And I grew up, my parents never they never hugged me. They never told me they loved me, right? And I guess in a sense, their way of motivating me is to tell me I'm not good enough. I don't think they did that on purpose, or probably that's how they grew up, right? It's not a thing to say, we're so proud of you, or you should be proud of yourself. They've always you see neighbor's kid can do this and you couldn't. You see your cousin did that, you can't not do this. So growing up is really challenging. Just almost never feel I was good enough, no matter what I do. And I think I got in this, probably a lot of people out there, similar situation, try to do things, just try to impress my parents. It's maybe I do this, my mom will finally be proud of me. Obviously that never happened. So till this day, I always tell people I do not have the best relationship with my mother. So my father passed away when I was in sophomore year when I was in China. He passed away from cancer, a really aggressive one. Within a month of diagnosis, he just passed away.
Wow.
And in my life, I never felt I was very close to him. In fact, I didn't have a lot of memory about him at all. So I was in years of therapy right now, and my therapist told me there's high possibility actually my brain purposefully block out the memories with him. Though I don't know. I couldn't recall a lot of the informations. My mom told me I was little, I was my daddy's little helper. I was following him all over the places. I have zero memory about that. And on the way growing up, I think I spent a lot of time in the school. My mom was the one helping me with schoolwork and everything. So I guess I never really paid much attention about how my dad's doing, what he's doing, and stuff like that. And then my mother grew up in a very tough situation. So she grew up during Cultural Revolution. So she went through Cultural Revolution in China. She was the youngest child in her household. She has a older sister and a brother. And apparently my grandma was, I don't know, can I curse on this show? I just want to make sure.
I'd rather not, but hey.
All right. So okay, so my grandma apparently must be a very selfish person, I guess. I want to use the word, ASS. But anyhow, um, so my grandma actually named my mother Redundant in China. That's her name in Chinese.
Wow, really?
So she was almost like an unwanted child.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's actually kind of the background and history why my mom is the way she is. She probably still is depressed in her whole life. Um, but so when she raised me, I think in psychology, actually, people would talk about this very unhealthy. She see me as an extension of herself rather than me as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
So when I grew up, I didn't know. Obviously, I didn't know those are problems, right? Till I'm much older and realized that became a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she would always say that she sacrificed for me. The reason I can accomplish anything because she sacrificed for me. So I grew up obviously struggle with my self-confidence, struggle with my, I guess, identity, what I want to be. I never knew what I want to be. I followed the perfect roadmaps. Grow up in China, go to
Mm-hmm.
school, ace this class, and then go to college. That's like the perfect roadmap.
Good.
And little background, people in US probably don't get this because in China you only have a once in a lifetime to join college, to go to college.
Really?
It's a huge deal. It's the I think it's a 2 or 3 days exam. I didn't even remember that now, but it's a whole country. The police will escort you to the exam location. That's how big deal it is. And there will
Sheesh.
be paramedics standby because every year there's students die in the exam room, just anxiety attack or stuff like that, heart attack,
Wow.
because of how much pressure that is. You really have a once in your lifetime to get the entry exam and go to the college. So
So if
just a
you
little background that.
so real quick, if you
Yeah,
missed
go
the
ahead.
test or failed the test, then you missed your one chance to go to college, is what you're saying.
Pretty much. The policy change. You can retake, but this exam only once a year, so your retake will be next year.
Mm.
And in theory, every year is harder than the previous year as a
Wow.
psychological thing. And you can't go
Yeah.
back to school. You have to go to like a private school. You go back to high school to study the exam. Basically, you almost have a gap year. You have to figure it out yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so most of the students who kind of retake once, retake twice, they just get scored lower and lower because you lost motivation and among other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So real quick, before we continue your story, I wanted to point out something for the listeners. I
Mm-hmm.
find it important that we hear all these different stories from different people because we all have different stories, right? And as we hear somebody else's story, then we can say, wow, I relate. Or that's so interesting that somebody else has gone through something like that. So Grace, what I find interesting about your story is you did have a lot of things happen when you grew up that affected your confidence and your ability to manage your emotions, with your mom and with your dad. And even then, you were trying to do all the right behaviors, right? He said, well, I was doing everything that everybody said I was supposed to do. And yet, I didn't feel happy or fulfilled or those emotions that I wanted because most people aren't taught how to do that. That's another purpose for this podcast. So people relate with the stories and where people come from. And then we share some tools so that these people say, okay, that's me. Now what? And we answer that question. All right, very
Awesome.
good. Continue your story.
I love you point that out. Yeah, and I think part of it's not just about emotion that I feel weird. It's actually I wasn't connect to my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I had really hard time. That took me years of therapy to actually to understand I have emotions
Right.
and to able to connect to that. I think that's a huge piece of puzzle also missing because I grew up, I do not suppose to have emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up back to little background, my mom went through a cultural revolution. What's happened is you can't trust anybody. You can't share your opinions. You can't have emotion. You can't let people know you're weak. right? And then, so all of those, though, when I grew up, my mom taught me that, said, you know, that's how I went through it. You have to do all of that to keep you safe, right?
Right.
And, but everybody has emotion somehow. So what
Mm-hmm.
happened, I think, is really an internal conflicts.
Exactly.
And that's actually an interesting thing. And when I work with dogs, a dog have internal conflicts in their
All right.
emotions.
Tell us more.
Yeah. So I work with a lot of extremely fearful dogs, and a lot of people don't realize their dog's fearful. What they see is dog being reactive. The dog lunging at people, lunging at dogs. If you walk on the street, you probably see those dogs like drag their owner all over the places and bark at cars, skateboards, and stuff like that. And then
Mm-hmm.
that's just reactive. There are ones could be aggressive at people's dog, like try to bite somebody or actually bit somebody out of fear. A lot of people kind of understand, okay, that might be fear. Some people think, oh, my dog just have strong personalities,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the reality is your dog probably lack of inner confidence. And one of the classic example, I heard this all the time, is like, oh, somebody gave my dog a treat. My dog took the treats. My dog even sniffed the person. Then when the person tried to pet my dog growled at him. And people very confused. They're like, I thought my dog loved that person because that person gave him a treat.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, your dog actually goes through internal conflicts right now. Your dog's very curious, and that person gave a treat, and he took the treat, and like we want to sniff that person. He's very curious right now. Then that person basically like did something almost like didn't ask permission, right? And overreached to
Mm-hmm.
what the dog can handle or where the trust lies. And what happened then? Your dog like retrieved, like, oh my gosh, it's actually a dangerous situation. I should have not been curious at the first place. Now
Yeah.
I need to get back and protect myself. So I said, your dog goes through internal conflicts. I said, it's really important for dog owners to understand how we can curate that curious to confident. How we can teach your dog, you can be curious and it's a safe environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing we tell people, stop reaching out to the dog to pet the dog because you're breaking that trust there. Your dog just at the borderline of like, I'm interested in this. Then you kind of break that trust. And I don't know if that makes sense to you in terms of like conflicts.
Sure. Yeah.
Uh,
It reminds me of a book I read about how to raise an emotionally intelligent child, where
mm,
sometimes these children are going through an emotional struggle or an emotional conflict, so they have these certain behaviors. They can't pay attention, or they react, or they're always angry, or they whatever. And too often people put a label to that. Okay, they have ADHD. Okay, they have this, that, and the other. When, just like you're saying, if we took the time to say what emotions are they struggling to deal with, then we say, okay, maybe it's a confidence thing, maybe it's a fear thing, maybe it's something else. Then they can learn to have power over their own lives and go forward instead of living the rest of their life according to what a label means.
I really love that because people label dogs too.
Yeah.
I have dog little anxious. My dog have separation anxiety. I said, let's not jump in conclusion for
Right.
your dog have separation anxiety. And then there's people, you know, you work with a lot of people have emotional trauma. People put dogs on drugs now,
Really?
antidepressant drugs.
Oh boy.
Yeah, because they're like, oh, your dog depressed. Your dog anxious. Let's give your dog some, what's a classic one? I forgot the name. Sleep my tongue right now. But yeah, there's multiple like human antidepressant drugs like give to the dog.
Really?
And you know, just got somebody reach out to me and said, Grace, my doctor said I should put my dogs on Prozac, right? That's one of the classic ones,
Mm-hmm.
on Prozac. And because my dog can't stop barking, I'm like, then we need to fix the barking, not put your dog on drugs.
Right.
And I said I don't work with dogs on drugs because I work with the dog's emotions. Now
Mm-hmm.
I can't work with a dog that emotionally not available. When they're on drugs, I actually have seen dogs on drugs. They're either like kind of sedated half the day, or they go through even harder emotional conflicts. that they can't process what's going on. Because in a sense that those drugs are kind of adjust to your brain chemicals, right? Now,
right.
and I have to say, no one knows how that adjusts dogs' brain chemicals, right? They just, I don't know, they prescribe that. I mean, it's for people, some people, one thing I discovered is that the biggest difference between you give drugs to human and versus give drugs to dogs is at least we can talk about it.
Yes.
We can say, okay, this drug make me not comfortable, or what could have happened. But when you put dog on drugs, your dog can't really tell you. Your dog give you the behavior that you may mistaken as your dog's improving. And so far, all the cases I've encountered, none of them actually help the dog if it's not making it worse. And then the biggest challenge people start facing is once your dog's on drugs, you almost never able to get it off drugs.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's a really heartbroken thing to see. People always like talk about, oh, if you creating boundaries with your dog to teach your dog to be confident, that could be like break the dog's spirit. There are people who use phrase break dog spirit. I think if anything, put your dog on drug, that's really break your dog's spirits.
Right.
So, you know, I can talk about this whole day.
No, that's interesting. So the principle that I want to pull out of this is, and of course there are places for this, so I'm not saying it'll never be okay, but with labels and with medicine, sometimes we use those as crutches. And when we do, we don't give our body the chance to learn how to heal itself, because we say, now I'm reliant upon that crutch and I can't do anything without that crutch. I can't do anything without that medicine because that's the only thing that makes me feel better. But we learn it's a logical process in the brain. If the brain has pain, it says, what am I going to do to solve that pain? If it learns that medicine is going to do that, the brain is always going to say, if I have pain, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to medicine. But what we do in this podcast and other conversations, we realize is, hold on, maybe we don't need the medicine. Maybe let's learn about what's deeper and the emotions or the blocked energy or something. And if we can learn to heal that and resolve that, which is very much in our power, as long as we take the time to do so and talk to the right people, then we don't have to rely on those crutches. And this is why I like to bring you on today, because you're talking about it specifically to dogs, but by doing so, we're able to understand it better instead of always talking about some emotions that are sometimes harder to understand.
Yeah.
What else can you tell us?
Oh my gosh, you brought up one of my memory. I was in a business conference once, and then this the presenter shared this story. He know nothing about dog training probably. He just shared this one story. Said in the wildlife, a wounded deer would actually go to a dark cave or something and hide for several days. And then in that moment, it's beyond physical recovery, but really it's emotional recovery. And then several days later, they will come out of the cave like nothing bad ever happened. They will live their life like before. And he said, but domesticated dogs have lost that skill. They can't recover from emotional trauma anymore. I heard that. I was like, oh my gosh, that's why I'm helping these dogs, because our human actually prevent the dogs to recover from their own emotional trauma. And in a sense, you know, if talk to human psychology, I'd probably say because we don't allow ourselves to recover from our own emotional trauma either.
Right.
Because it's too painful to think about it. So we don't go there. I remember one thing talk about how to deal your own emotional. It's actually to feel it, right? Like how you feel right now, which part in your body you're feeling right now, and really facing it. But, you know, including dogs and humans, what do? We distract ourselves. Let's go for a run, right? And same with dogs. Dog have separation anxiety. Oh, let me ride bicycle and let you run for 5 miles. Then you're physically tired, literally. But your mind is actually, your emotion not really being recovered. Then you start relying on the runner's high. That happened to the dog too. Is actually dog also have dopamine relief in the brain when the dog doing physical exercise. And then you realize I need to run my dog 10 miles now because 5 miles no longer enough.
Yeah.
And till the point like, oh my God, this is not working. I can't keep up with my dog. And And people tend to think physical exercise is a solution to dogs' behavior challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably apply to human to a degree. Not everybody, obviously, a gym rat or something, but we tend to find things to distract ourselves and not to deal with our own emotions.
Exactly. And for people who are like, well, I'm a runner and I like running, so does that mean I shouldn't run anymore? Not exactly. It's the difference of, is it a release, a healthy release, or is it an escape? If it's an escape, then just like Grace is saying, 5 miles won't be enough, so you'll have to run 10, and all of a sudden you're running all the time and you can never feel satisfied, and then it turns more into an addiction. So with whatever the behavior that we turn to as our escape, there are ways to still have good behavior as a release. But to do so, just like Grace was saying, is we just have to take that time. Maybe it sounds like a simple step, but it's a crucial step that says, pause. What am I feeling? Where am I feeling it? What's it trying to tell me? Okay, now that I've listened, I can feel it and let it go. I can release it. Then I feel ready to go on a run. Isn't that great? You know?
Awesome. That's what, it's kind of funny. I teach that to the dog too. I tell dog owner to relax their dogs first before they go on a run or walk. Actually, yeah, to calm the mind first instead of just go out the door all crazy.
Mm-hmm. So, and again, I just like connecting these analogies. If we think of physical, even if we're going on a run, what should we do to take care of our body? Most people skip this step. We should stretch and warm up, right? But too often people are like, well, I just need to do a 5 mile run, so I'm going to go do a 5 mile run. And then they wonder why their body doesn't feel very good afterwards. Same thing with the mind. If we just say, no, I'm going to go to work and we're going to deal with my emotions, I'm just going to be busy, I'm just going to ignore it, then we wonder why we don't feel so good afterwards. So again, it's those simple little steps that may not be the most fun, but they're crucial and so important.
Yeah, in dog training, we actually, I share with my clients, boring means success.
Okay.
They're actually boring. People don't want to do the things that are boring.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing you pointed out really great is we stretch. Well, I should do more stretch. Now I talk about it, but anyhow, the more you stretch physically, and in a sense, you stretch your mind, right? When you have to deal with your own emotions, and the more you stretch, the better it gets.
Mm-hmm.
It's get easier over time. That it's almost like it's also, I guess, in a sense, almost can think it's even in your brain is kind of a muscle. You're stretching it.
True.
And the more you exercise that, the more you get out of it, and then over time it's getting easier.
Mm-hmm.
Same applied to dogs. At the beginning, it's really hard for them. I tell my clients they've never learned to deal with their own emotions either for their whole life. And now you're teaching them to do that. It's freaking hard at the beginning. They're gonna act up, make you feel bad. And that's also like emotions from human. We tend to have projections on the dogs, right? We feel like, oh my gosh, am I hurting my dog? But you're working through a very important phase of training to teach your dog to relax themselves, and may not look good. Just like I know some people get really deep into their emotion. They start crying, right? They're screaming because they've never actually get that deep before.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay. Well, this has been fantastic. I hope it helps the listeners, understand emotions in a new way. Maybe they own dogs. I'm sure they see dogs, right? Now they can think, oh, how does that relate to me in my behavior or in the behavior of other humans that I'm with? Anything else you'd like to teach us before we wrap up, Grace?
I think part of it's just, as a human, don't be ashamed seeking professional help. I was ashamed of seeing therapists at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a culture that you can't go see a therapist unless you're darn crazy.
Yeah.
Took my husband, I think he always tell me, it took him years to convince me to go see a therapist. And he never gave up because he believed that that's what I need to do. And probably the best decision ever in my life. And now I wish I could have started earlier. That would be maybe give me shortcuts 3 years of my life or something like that, right?
Yeah.
I think people I'm glad you have podcasts like this because people are listening. They may or may not seeking help, but they're trying to find some sort of support. It's really important, and that there's nothing to be ashamed of. I cannot talk about I see therapists. Back then, I couldn't. I was like, oh, people gonna think I have problems if I see a therapist. Now I'm like, yeah, everybody needs somebody to talk to.
Oh yeah.
And yeah,
So
I hope
helpful.
that being helpful.
Oh yeah, I love what you said about it's something about it could have saved me 3 years of my life. That's something important and very valid. If someone listener is thinking, yeah, it's scary to go see a therapist because I have to first admit to myself that I need help, and then I don't want anybody to hear or find out that I'm seeing a therapist because they might think crazy things of me. Think of it a different way. Think of the positives that can come out of it. You could still stay where you are for who knows how many more years, or you could talk to somebody in a safe environment who can help you receive the healing and knowledge that you need and get you 3 years ahead of your life, just like Grace was saying. So hopefully that's a message of hope for the listeners today. Grace, how can people connect with you on social media if they'd like to do so?
The best way actually go to my website, mensa-mas.com. Mensa is MENSA. That's like the IQ organization, the IQ organization. And the MUTS is MUTTS, mensa-mas.com. So they can download the report I wrote about debunking 2 biggest dog industry norms, as well as 3 techniques they can do today to reduce their dog's reactivity.
Oh, very nice. Okay, yeah, I'll be sure to put that website in the notes for everybody. Grace, thank you for joining today. It's been a pleasurable conversation. And thank you, everybody, for joining another episode of the Champions of Self podcast. And we'll talk to you all next time.